Welcome! Today I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the cap molds I've been working on. I've tried a few different things, and this is my newest endeavor, and that is to try and get, as usual, my dice in a way that it doesn't affect the dice or ruin the dice by making these molds. So what I've done is, if you have normal dice that don't have these edges like mine do, you can just put them on a sheet of tape and do it that way. The problem with doing my cap molds that way with these edges here is that it leaves a thin little layer that easily gets ripped, right? And you don't want that to happen. So I started doing these where they're kind of up on a platform, so it makes it thicker, the silicone part a little bit thicker up to that. And what I'm trying to do now is make it so that everything that happens to the one face of the die stays only on the face. It doesn't go over the edges or any of the corners onto other faces. So what I've done is I've made some little templates. The face of it is actually slightly smaller than what is on the face, so it should go on the inside, so any of the lines or issues when you pull the resin out will only be on that one face. You can craft knife off the excess flashing and just sand that one face. That's the idea. The secondary idea is to make sure that that face gets completely pushed down level, so it's not sticking up after. And a lot of that has to do with getting the lid to stay securely down in it without distorting it. So you could stack stuff on top of it, right, and to make sure that it stays down, but sometimes that will squish it and make them a little bit distorted, which isn't what we want. So what I'm going to try and do this time is create some dice molds using these, and then when I create the lids, I'm going to put some rocks or something, just some kind of weight in the lid to help keep it down. I've put some keys on the new ones to also help make sure that once I get the lid put in that it stays there. I don't have that set up on my normal size ones yet, but I can do stuff like that. I've tried it both ways. I've tried multiple silicones. I still think that the Dragon Skin 10 is the best to use, at least for the bottom where you're going to be doing a lot of the stretching and things, so that's what I'm going to use. The top, the cap isn't going to matter, so I'm just going to use whatever leftover resin I have. But so for this example, I had even tried, after putting it in, putting like a toothpick or something for kind of a relief for the resin to go up into. That didn't really seem to make that much of a difference. I think it'll be okay as long as we can get it down flat to get all the excess resin out of it, but not also squish our mold and make it distorted, right? So that's the goal. And so with this, I've got on my new things with my new prints that have the faces on here. I also have a little groove in them, and I've just been using tack putty because, again, I don't want to have to do anything that would mar or mess up my originals. So even when I go to take the excess flashing off, I don't like to use a craft knife because it will leave little cut lines in it, and those will appear in the next one. But as far as this goes, it's easier to show with the big one than it is with the others, but you just put that little bit of tack putty in the space there. The idea is that it will make it go as flat as it can without but also still be able to hold it in place. And it doesn't have to be super tough, you know, it just has to keep it from wobbling around or moving when I go to do the pour. In this case, I don't want my number one facing the same direction as my putty, just because it doesn't stick as well that way, so I'm going to go a different direction. Otherwise it'll just take up all the putty and go up inside the number and not really give you much of a surface area to connect to. And it just has to hold it. And then with this one I can just put the sheath on. That one's ready to go. The other ones, I use a strip of tape because the way that I have this set, there's nothing keyed or anything, so it's just a frame, and that will help keep the frame in place and also make it so that the silicone doesn't leak. I'm not entirely sure how much silicone I'm going to use. I'm going to start with 4 ounces. This is some of the Dragon Skin 10 medium. It'll be easier to show on the big one, but then I'm going to take those tiny little extra flaps there with my tweezers even and just pull them off. I'm not going to use a craft knife on it unless I hold it up and use the craft knife so that it doesn't touch the die, because you don't want to scratch your die. Okay, so now I've gone through and I've got that all cleaned up as best I can. It's not perfect, but that's okay because it's all going to be on that side that's going to be sanded anyway. So now we're going to take some Vaseline or petroleum jelly, doesn't matter what brand you use. We're going to coat just the silicone, and this where it's got the deep parts, we're going to try and do the sides as best I can without touching the actual die, and if I do I'll try and just usually just use the other side of it to kind of wipe it off. Okay, now that's cured. We have our thin layer. We'll go ahead and get these weighted down with our handy dandy handful of rocks that we just grabbed from outside and then just washed real quick. Decent amount of heft to them, hopefully. Okay, good enough. Okay, we're ready now to make some dice and see what happens. I'm gonna have to clean the residue off of my masters, but other than that, unscathed, and you can use them again. The hard part, of course, is you're going to be getting out to actually line up. But once they're lined up, it seems like the weight should be good enough to hold it down in place. If I haven't mentioned it already, I'd like to thank my supporters for their donations. It's very much appreciated. I obviously would not be even making videos still if I didn't have a little bit of payback for my time. Other than for my own personal knowledge, I guess I would just keep it to myself. But I appreciate you guys, and if you aren't a supporter and would like to be, you could just donate, even just a one-time. You don't have to donate monthly. You'll also get access to some of these tools and things that I use to make my dice, as well as some accessories that I use for when I play Dungeons and Dragons. Now to get those weighted lids on, I'm used to just like bend flopping it down. You can't really do that with the rocks in it. Just trying to get them seated. See how it just, I don't know if you can see that, but it just pushes right back up. What I should do at some point maybe is make some little tracks in the lid as well, so that it has somewhere for the resin to go, and maybe just even go out the side. That's usually why I put a sprue in the top, is so that it can just come up and then settle back down into it. Where the lid is so rigid now, it's hard to get it to squish and form back down into those holes where I have them so thick now. And the excess stuff is usually what also, you know, pushes it back up. It does help as far as the weighted lids to keep that down. I don't know that it's perfectly flat still. Again, my number one issue with cap molds in general, but other than that, everything else is a lot more easier, and it uses a lot less resin, or not resin, silicone, than if you did a full set individual with sprues. Okay, those look pretty good, so we're gonna go ahead and put those in the pressure pot, and we'll check them tomorrow. Let's see how well these did. Hard to see, but it looks like it's fine. As you can see, the flashing and everything is on just that one face. So I can just cut that off, sand that, and it's good. The wall is there, but it got pushed down in, and so it came back up out. So it would be good to add a channel, and that wouldn't be too hard. Could just cut little sections from each of these going out to the edge, so that when you push it in, the resin goes out instead of just getting smushed in there and then lifting it up and out. So overall, that's an option. I don't see any lifted up sections, so that's good. The lid seems like it's right where it should have been. That looks pretty darn good. Perfectly flat almost. That's how you want it to be. And even with the big one, even, it doesn't seem like I need the grooves in it for the resin to go out. I did a fairly decent job of just squishing it out, but one may want to do that to make it easier for the resin to flow out. I'll leave that up to you. And even if you have this and it happened to not be working, like I said, you could cut some grooves into it carefully. Otherwise, what I would do before actually pouring the cap is maybe take some toothpicks or something, cut off the ends so that there's not pointy ends, and then just leave them, stick them so that they have little tubes going out to the outsides, and then that's where it will push the resin. These all look really good. Even for having my accidental random chunks of silicone that got stuck in there, it doesn't look too bad on the face. I mean, you can see the little bit of goobers and stuff on there from it. I guess I should actually sand them and show you what they look like after. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got now after we've done that. And after the first set, for example, I'll show you the difference here. This is the first set I did, And then the second set, after I trimmed the inside a little bit, you can see on these, there's little divots in there. I mean, if I kept going, I could sand them out, but then I'll lose those edges a little bit, and I'd have to sand those in again too. But those came from the little flaps inside the mold, right where it touched the die. So I had to go in with some cutters, or you can use a craft knife. After the die's out of there, you can just trim that off, and then it will not leave those as bad. So with the new one I did, this is after I had trimmed that off and I was able to sand it all off. So some things to take note of. I used a different silicone, right, because I didn't think the lid really mattered all that much, which it really doesn't, but I would prefer to do the same type of silicone for the bottom and the top, if that makes sense. So if I'm using my dragon skin, I want my dragon skin on the bottom, and I want my dragon skin to be this first layer here, just because it fits a little bit better. For me, the dragon skin works better. It doesn't rip as much, even in the little sections and things here, and I think overall will last longer. The downside to doing this with the things sticking out so far, I probably already mentioned this, is it's harder to get it to go in and stay in, right? Because you got to get them all in there and get them in and get it to stay. The extra weight does help keep it there once it's there, but I don't know that you necessarily need to do that. It's just something I wanted to experiment with this time. So I also did a set where I did a really thin lid, and I've never done really thin lids before either. And this also worked fine. This one I just did straight on tape, so it doesn't have the depth that the other one does. So it does have the flashing all along each of those edges, which is going to be a little bit harder to remove, a little bit more work. But this actually worked okay, and it was actually easier to squish the extra resin out because I have so much more play, right, with how that is. I can smush it out. I mean, that's exaggerated, of course, with the smushing that out, but it was easier to get the excess out and get it nice and flat. And while it's brand new like this, the silicone sticks really well to itself. Over time, as it gets dirty and stuff, that probably won't work as well, in which case something like this maybe would. We'll see. Time will tell. That is the assumption. And then this was the D20 that I finally finished, and instead of putting rocks in it, I just threw some old dice that didn't print right in there. I must not have had them fully cured though, because the one in the middle for sure had some cure inhibition on the inside there, but that's okay because it's just weight. And so we'll see how this turned out. Worked great. And then of course, just like the others, I should just have the flashing only on the top, and then I'll only have to do a little bit of trimming with a knife and sand that, and it's done. Well, hopefully that's been helpful for you if you're trying to decide how you want to maybe try and do some cap molds. And I think overall, in the long run of work time, with being able to only sand one face, similar to like I do with my sprue dice, that's probably going to work one of the best ways. And if I haven't already mentioned it, thank you to those who support this channel, and if you would like to also support this channel, make sure to check out the links in the description, or just buy something on the 3DM Tabletop store. It all helps me continue to do this, and until next time, I guess experiment with some weighted cap molds.